They say a mother's love is limitless, unbreakable, unstoppable. But what happens when that love is taken for granted? What happens when the people you sacrificed everything for, your own son, your own daughter-in-law, live in comfort while you drag your body to the ground, day after day, night after night, carrying the weight of a world that isn't even yours? Imagine walking home after a double shift, 2 exhausting transfers, aching muscles, heavy bags in your hands, and knowing that inside your own house, 2 grown adults, the very people you raised, have not lifted a finger in years. They lounge on the couch, living like royalty while you fight for every breath, every paycheck, every scrap of dignity. Most would break under the injustice. Most would collapse under the exhaustion. But not her, because sometimes the universe speaks in the smallest of moments. A single overheard phone call on a crowded bus, a voice, a secret, a truth, changes everything. One sentence ignites a fire so fierce, it burns away fear, doubt, and fatigue. One sentence transforms a tired mother into a force of reckoning, a woman who has been underestimated for too long. That fire doesn't scream, it doesn't demand attention. It burns quietly, strategically, and mercilessly. And when it strikes, it leaves nothing standing in its path but justice, respect, and the power she was born to reclaim. This is not just a story of revenge. This is a story of resilience, of courage, of a woman who refused to be invisible in her own life, who refused to let betrayal and laziness define her home. It is a story that proves no one, no matter how entitled or arrogant, can stand in the way of someone who decides she will no longer be used. So watch closely, because what you are about to see is a journey from exhaustion to empowerment, from betrayal to justice, from being overlooked to becoming unstoppable. Every choice, every action, every quiet moment of strategy will remind you, sometimes the strongest revenge is the one carried out without shouting, without violence, but with precision, dignity, and fire in your soul. And when this story ends, you will not just remember her, you will feel the fire she ignited. She carried the weight of an entire household on her shoulders, a burden no mother should ever have to bear alone. Every morning began before sunrise, when the world was still quiet and the streets were still sleeping. She tied her worn shoes, grabbed those heavy bags, and stepped into a day that demanded far more from her than her aging body could give. 2 jobs, back-to-back shifts, 2 exhausting bus transfers. Yet she never complained. She walked with determination, with the strength only a mother's love can produce, even when her hands ached from lifting, even when her feet burned from standing too long, even when her back screamed for rest. She told herself it was worth it. She told herself she was doing it for family. But inside, deep beneath her steady breath and swollen feet, she knew something wasn't right. Because while she fought the world outside, inside her own home lived 2 people who had forgotten what responsibility looked like. Her grown son, once the boy she raised with hope in her heart, now sat on the couch for 2 full years as if the world owed him comfort. Beside him, his wife complained more than she breathed, scrolling through her phone with the entitlement of a queen who had done nothing to earn her crown. They lounged on soft cushions while she dragged bags heavier than her own spirit. They ordered takeout with money she earned, lived under a roof she paid for. Soaked in comfort, she sacrificed everything to maintain. And the cruelest part, they did it without shame, without guilt, without even gratitude. They watched her leave for work and never once asked how her day was. They watched her bring groceries and never once offered to carry a single bag. They treated her like a servant in the very home she built. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself they just needed time. But days turned into months, months into 2 long years, and still nothing changed. Every step she took on those crowded buses, every shift she survived with trembling muscles, every dollar she saved despite her body breaking, it was all poured into a household where she wasn't respected, only used. Her sacrifices were invisible to the very people who should have cherished her most. Some nights, as she sat on the edge of her bed rubbing her aching legs, she wondered how love could be repaid with such coldness. how a mother's devotion could be twisted into fuel for someone else's laziness, how her own son could watch her struggle and still demand more. But even then, she didn't break. She held her silence. She held her pain. She held her home together with sheer willpower. Because that's what mothers do. They give until there is nothing left to give. They carry burdens no one else sees. They stand firm even when the world pushes them to their knees. She believed love could heal. She believed her patience would open their eyes. She believed her efforts would one day be appreciated. She believed until one day, life decided to show her the truth she had been too tired to notice. And in that truth, she would finally find the fire she didn't know she still had. 2 years. 730 days of exhaustion, sacrifice, and silent suffering. All stolen under the guise of family. Every dollar she earned, every ounce of energy she spent, every moment of peace she dared to hold, was siphoned off by the two people who owed her respect, love, and gratitude. Her son, once a boy with dreams, now lounged on the couch like a king in a palace of her making, while his wife treated the house like a hotel where she was the VIP guest. They watched her run herself ragged day after day and never once lifted a finger to help. They treated her meals, her hard-earned money, and her sweat as if it were theirs to consume, as if the years of effort she poured into keeping the home together were obligations she owed without question. And for 2 years, she bore it silently, watching as her life's work was drained into their comfort while she remained a ghost in her own house. The betrayal cut deeper than fatigue. It wasn't just laziness. It was entitlement. They had learned over time that she would endure anything, forgive anything, and provide everything. They assumed her heart would never harden. They assumed her body would never protest. They assumed her soul could be stretched endlessly, a rubber band of submission that never snapped. But in her silent suffering, a storm was brewing. Every unpaid bill they avoided, every complaint they aired without guilt, every morsel of comfort they consumed without offering gratitude became fuel for the fire that had been quietly smoldering in her heart. She saw the truth that 2 years of indulgence and dependency had revealed. These were not children in need of guidance. These were opportunists exploiting the one person who had kept the world upright for them. She realized something essential: that day family is not defined by blood, but by responsibility, respect, and reciprocity. She had spent 2 years giving and forgiving, assuming love would change their habits. But love without accountability had allowed them to grow bolder, lazier, more audacious in their entitlement. They had assumed she was powerless, that her exhaustion made her pliable, that her devotion rendered her blind. And they had been right, until the moment came when exhaustion transformed into clarity. 2 years of exploitation had not broken her spirit, it had tempered it like steel in fire. Every insult, every act of laziness, every moment of disrespect had prepared her for the reckoning that would inevitably arrive. They had used her patience, misread her love, and underestimated her resolve. And they would soon learn that the mother who had carried the household on her back for years was no longer a passive figure to be manipulated. She was a force of justice, and she was ready to reclaim what they had stolen: her dignity, her peace, and the respect they had refused to give. It happened on a crowded bus, in the hum of engines and chatter of strangers, when life decided to intervene. She overheard a phone call, a conversation not meant for her ears, a confession not meant to see the light of day. The words sliced through the fog of exhaustion like a razor, revealing a secret plot her son and daughter-in-law had carefully hidden, a betrayal she had suspected but never confirmed. In that instant, the world shifted. The phone call was more than revelation. It was permission. It was proof. It was ignition. 2 years of silent suffering had prepared her to endure, but this call made endurance obsolete. Her fatigue became fury, her resignation became resolve, her pain became a weapon. The call exposed plans they had concocted while she toiled at 2 jobs. Plans to further exploit her resources, manipulate her generosity, and continue living off her sacrifice while hiding their intentions behind smiles and feigned respect. Every word she overheard added weight to the injustice, a ledger of deceit and entitlement they had built in the shadows. And in that moment, she realized she could no longer be the exhausted, overlooked martyr. She could no longer allow them to dictate the terms of her home, her energy, her life. The phone call was the spark that lit the fire that had been quietly burning for 2 long years, and that fire would demand accountability. She didn't scream, she didn't confront them immediately. Instead, she listened, calculated, and allowed the revelation to crystallize into a plan. For 2 years, she had been reactive. Now she would be proactive. Every lie they had whispered, every scheme they had hidden, every moment of disrespect was now fuel for the storm she would unleash. The mother who had been dragged to exhaustion on buses, who had lifted heavy bags in silence, who had endured 2 years of betrayal, suddenly found herself armed with clarity. That single overheard conversation transformed her despair into determination, her suffering into strategy, her loyalty into justice. By the time she returned home, nothing would be the same. The world had whispered the truth to her in a moment of serendipity, and she would respond with a reckoning so precise, so devastating, that they would remember it for the rest of their lives. Exhaustion had been her constant companion for years, a shadow that weighed down her every step, her every breath. She had become accustomed to the aches in her muscles, the blisters on her hands, the sleepless nights, and the heavy burden of carrying a household alone while her son and daughter-in-law lounged on the couch as if the world owed them comfort. Each day she moved through a haze of fatigue, pushing herself beyond the limits of human endurance, telling herself that this was what family required, that this was what sacrifice looked like. Yet, no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she gave, the weight of their entitlement pressed on her heart, and she felt herself slipping into despair. She thought she was powerless, trapped in a life of servitude disguised as love, until that one moment on the bus changed everything. The phone call was ordinary at first, just the background noise of another person speaking, fragments of conversation floating through the air. But then a single sentence pierced the fog of her life like lightning through a stormy sky. It was unexpected, sharp, and undeniable, a truth she had suspected but never confirmed, a revelation that illuminated the full scope of her son and daughter-in-law's deception. Her body trembled, but not from fatigue this time. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from awakening. That one sentence ignited a fire that had been smoldering quietly in the depths of her soul for 2 long years. Every hour of exhaustion, every dollar earned, every sacrifice she had made suddenly became fuel for something far stronger than mere survival. It was clarity, it was determination, it was righteous fury, a recognition that she had been used, and that her endurance was about to be transformed into power. In that instant, she realized she had been playing a role she no longer had to endure. She understood that her tired body was not a weakness, but a vessel for resilience. She saw that the patience she had once mistaken for submission was actually the perfect preparation for the moment she would reclaim control. Her mind sharpened, her focus intensified, and her spirit flared with a purpose that demanded action. The fire within her was not reckless, it was calculated, measured, and relentless. She could feel it coursing through her veins, filling the spaces once occupied by doubt, anger, and despair. It was as if the universe had whispered the truth in her ear, granting her permission to rise above exhaustion and face the injustice that had stolen years of her life. No longer would she carry the weight of others' laziness while they reaped the benefits of her labor. No longer would she allow herself to be invisible in her own home, ignored, taken for granted, and disrespected. The fire burning inside her transformed exhaustion into resolve, weakness into strength, and invisibility into presence. It made her see the road ahead, clearly, a path where her dignity, her authority, and her peace would no longer be negotiable. She would act, and her actions would speak louder than words, louder than complaints, louder than excuses. That one sentence from a stranger's call had unlocked something she had nearly forgotten, her own power, her own voice, and her own right to stand up against those who had taken advantage of her for far too long. From that day forward, she was no longer just a tired mother. She was a force of reckoning, a storm waiting to strike with precision, a woman whose fire would not be extinguished by entitlement, laziness, or disrespect. Exhaustion had been her teacher, but fire had become her weapon, and nothing would stop her from reclaiming the life and dignity she had been denied for far too long. Her revenge was not loud. It was not messy. It did not require confrontation, screaming, or dramatic displays. Instead, it was calculated, precise, and devastating in its subtlety. Every action she took after overhearing that life-altering phone call was designed to dismantle the false sense of security her son and daughter-in-law had built over 2 years. She moved quietly but with purpose, each step deliberate, each decision strategic. She began by reclaiming control of her household, setting boundaries that had long been ignored. Bills were no longer paid automatically. Privileges they had taken for granted were carefully limited. She changed locks, restructured finances, and established rules that communicated one undeniable truth: she would no longer be a doormat for their laziness and entitlement. The shift was silent, almost invisible at first, but it was lethal. The power lay in the absence of spectacle. She did not raise her voice because her actions carried a weight that words could never match. Every denied request, every corrected mistake, every consequence administered in calm authority struck deeper than any confrontation could. She refused to be provoked. Their whining, pleading, and complaints only served to highlight their own guilt and entitlement. She did not respond with anger. She responded with consequences. With the quiet but undeniable force of justice, she organized her life so that they could no longer exploit her labor, her money, or her energy. Simple acts, removing financial privileges, redistributing chores, refusing to cater to every whim, became her weapons. They were shocks to the system, small yet profound, gradually eroding their confidence and sense of entitlement. They thought they had the upper hand because they had relied on her exhaustion for 2 years. But exhaustion, tempered with clarity and purpose, had transformed into a weapon far more effective than any loud confrontation. The brilliance of her revenge lay in its restraint. Every move was measured to maximize impact without creating a scene, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing her rage. They could not argue with her because each action was just, fair, and unavoidable. Every cut, every restriction, every boundary she enforced communicated louder than words. Their comfort had been built on her sacrifice, and now the tables had turned. No shouting, no yelling, no dramatic displays, just consequences so sharp, so deliberate, that the very foundation of their laziness began to crumble. By the time they realized what was happening, she had already dismantled the illusion of power they had held over her for years. Her revenge was complete not because it was loud, but because it was inevitable, unstoppable, and surgically precise. The day they walked through the door, after another long day of comfort and entitlement, they found themselves in a world transformed. The rules they had ignored, the privileges they had abused, the laziness they had taken for granted, all had vanished under her quiet authority. The house was still, orderly, and unyielding, reflecting the precision of her planning and the finality of her decision. They expected the same mother who had carried their burdens, paid their bills, and accommodated their whims for years. Instead, they found a woman who had finally reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her authority. Confusion quickly turned to panic as they realized that the easy life they had relied on was over. Every attempt to plead, to demand, to manipulate, was met with calm resistance and calculated consequence. For 2 long years, they had believed she was powerless. That exhaustion would keep her in submission. That love meant endless tolerance. But now they faced a truth they had never anticipated. The one they had exploited for so long was no longer available to be used. The shock of seeing her resolve, the absolute, unwavering fire in her eyes, broke their arrogance and entitlement. They could not understand how the quiet, tired mother they had underestimated had become a force capable of dismantling the comfort they had taken for granted. Every restriction, every consequence, every boundary imposed felt like a punishment they had earned. For the first time, they felt powerless, small, and exposed. It was not just her actions that shattered them. It was the realization that their own behavior had created this reckoning. She had not yelled, not hit, not humiliated them publicly. She had acted in silence, with intelligence and strategy, letting the weight of their choices return to them tenfold. Every moment of entitlement, every act of laziness, every demand had contributed to this awakening, this undeniable reckoning. When they understood the magnitude of their miscalculation, the world they had taken for granted collapsed. The mother who had once been exhausted, overlooked, and used had risen from the ashes, and her quiet, relentless revenge had left them broken, humbled, and aware of the consequences of their years of exploitation. In that silence, in that shock, they finally learned the harsh truth. Never underestimate the one who has carried the weight of the world on her shoulders, especially when she decides she is done being used. And so it ends, not with chaos, not with shouting, not with fleeting drama. It ends with quiet, unshakable justice. The mother, who carried the weight of 2 jobs, 2 transfers, aching muscles, and years of silent sacrifice, has finally reclaimed what was always hers: her dignity, her authority, and the respect that had been stolen from her by the very people who should have loved her most. For 2 long years, she endured exploitation, entitlement, and laziness in the people she raised with all her heart. She tolerated betrayal, she forgave when she should have enforced boundaries, and she sacrificed when she should have demanded accountability. But the moment came when exhaustion transformed into fire, when revelation sparked clarity, and when patience matured into strategy. Her revenge was not loud or chaotic. It was precise, measured, and devastatingly effective. She did not argue, she did not shout, she did not humiliate. She acted with the calm authority of someone who knows their power and refuses to let it be underestimated. Every restriction, every boundary, every consequence she placed on her son and daughter-in-law struck harder than any outburst ever could. And the result was immediate and undeniable: the entitled, lazy couple finally realized the cost of underestimating her. Their comfort evaporated. Their arrogance crumbled. They were forced to face the consequences of their actions, not because she yelled, but because she acted, because she reclaimed control, because she transformed years of exhaustion into unstoppable determination. This story is more than revenge. It is a testament to resilience. It is proof that no matter how many times you are overlooked, disrespected, or taken for granted, you can rise. You can fight back, not with anger, but with clarity, strategy, and unwavering strength. You can reclaim your life, your dignity, and your peace. And in doing so, you send a message to the world and to those who tried to exploit you, that patience has limits, and strength has its moments to shine. For anyone watching this, remember, no act of betrayal goes unnoticed forever, and no sacrifice is in vain. Life has a way of restoring balance when you refuse to be a victim. Stand firm, act with purpose, and never underestimate the fire that grows from patience tested and endurance stretched. If you found yourself inspired by this story, if you felt the power, the fire, and the lesson of reclaiming your life, then don't forget to hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that resilience is strength, and justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it strikes quietly and effectively. And if you want to witness more stories of courage, empowerment, and unstoppable determination, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more life-changing, inspiring stories to the world, stories that prove that even in the darkest times, strength, patience, and calculated action can create miracles. Remember, the strongest revenge is not in violence or chaos. It is in reclaiming what is rightfully yours and standing tall while others crumble under the weight of their own mistakes. This mother did not just win, she became unstoppable, and so can you.